Since 1974, every barrel of oil on Earth has been traded in US dollars. Not pounds, not gold, just dollars. This single arrangement gave America more leverage over the world than any military ever could. And now, that system is cracking. To understand why, you have to go back to 1971. That year, President Richard Nixon made a decision that changed the world economy. He ended the gold standard. Until then, every US dollar was backed by physical gold. Nixon removed that guarantee, leaving the dollar as a fiat currency, backed by nothing but trust in the US government. Securing the dollar's future required a new anchor. In 1974, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia to build a different kind of alliance, one that would tie the US dollar to the world's most essential resource. The terms were specific. The US provided Saudi Arabia with military protection and weapons. In exchange, Saudi Arabia agreed to price all of its oil exports exclusively in US dollars and invest those oil profits back into US Treasury bonds. Because every nation needed oil, every nation now needed dollars. This forced central banks around the world to maintain massive dollar reserves and buy American debt, effectively making the dollar the indispensable foundation of global trade. This demand granted America what economists call exorbitant privilege. Because the world required dollars, the US could print money to pay its debts without any other economy. It also guaranteed cheap borrowing. Foreign nations needed a place to park their dollar reserves, so they buy US Treasury bonds. This constant demand kept American interest rates low, allowing the government to fund infrastructure and spending at a massive scale. This monopoly also created a tool of financial warfare. Since trade runs on dollars, the US can cut any adversary off from the global banking system by sanctioning their access to the currency. This global demand for American debt directly supports the $800 billion defense budget. Without petrodollar demand for treasury bonds, the US could not afford a military of this size. Finally, it cemented global influence. International institutions like the IMF and the World Bank operate through dollar-denominated corridors, ensuring that global development remains tied to American financial rules. The petrodollar system didn't just make the United States wealthy, it gave Washington the power to act as the architect and the gatekeeper of the international economy. This system remained uncontested until 2022. When the United States weaponized the dollar against Russia following the invasion of Ukraine, it changed the risk assessment for every other nation. Washington froze $300 billion in Russian central bank assets. This showed the rest of the world that if your reserves are held in dollars, they are only yours as long as you stay on Washington's good side. The shift was immediate. Saudi Arabia, the country that helped build the petrodollar, began serious discussions about accepting Chinese yuan for oil and joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The sanctions intended to punish Russia acted as a catalyst, pushing neutral nations to actively build financial systems that are insulated from American policy. In 2023, the BRICS coalition expanded to include major global energy producers like the UAE and Iran, creating a bloc specifically focused on non-dollar trade. This expanded group commands 40% of global population and 25% of GDP. They are building alternatives. China launched CIPS, a direct alternative to the SWIFT system Washington uses for sanctions. Over 140 countries now use this infrastructure to clear transactions, bypassing US control. Emerging powers are successfully laying the literal financial plumbing required to operate in a world where the dollar is no longer the only choice. Despite these changes, the petrodollar is not disappearing overnight. What we are seeing is a slow dilution of its absolute monopoly. The dollar still holds 58% of global reserves, down from 71% in 2000. Backed by a $27 trillion economy, it remains dominant. Alternatives aren't ready. The euro represents 20%, but is politically fragmented. The yuan sits at 2%, too tightly controlled by Beijing. And the much-discussed unified BRICS currency is currently just a concept, not a functional reality. This isn't a collapse. It is a multi-decade structural shift toward a multipolar world, where the dollar must exist alongside robust, independent alternatives. India illustrates this transition perfectly. Every year, India pays a $150 billion oil bill entirely in dollars, making its economy vulnerable to every move by the U.S. Federal Reserve. When the U.S. raises interest rates, India's import costs rise and capital flows out of the country. India is effectively tied to American monetary policy without having a seat at the table. To reduce this risk, India bypassed the dollar to buy Russian oil directly in rupees. This deal saved the country billions in conversion costs and demonstrated that major economies can now step outside the dollar system when necessary. But India isn't abandoning the dollar. Its massive IT sector and stock markets are deeply integrated into the American financial system. India's strategy is a hedge. Use the rupee where possible, but keep the dollar where it is needed. The era of the uncontested American financial monopoly is fading. The move toward a multi-currency reality is underway, and while the dollar remains the largest player, its absolute leverage is shrinking. What replaces that 1974 deal will determine global power for the next 50 years. Subscribe to War Explained for more.